This is a 2014 Kia Forte EX, and it developed misfires on probably originally just one cylinder, but now it has a P0300, which is a random misfire, and it has number 1 and 3 misfires also. Take this cover off, you just pull on it. This rubber fasteners underneath, no bolts. Someone has been changing parts, and before you start putting spark plugs and coils on this thing, you have to know this is a direct injection. This GDI is a direct injection gasoline engine, so it does not have old school injectors that spray fuel in front of the intake valve and therefore wash them off, or intake valves and wash them, but it has the injector right into the combustion chamber, and the intake valve is prone to build up carbon deposits, especially if you use low grade fuel and low grade engine oil. All that lands on your intake valve, like in this picture. So this stuff is special for intake valves and turbos. Supposed to use it probably at least yearly, 10,000 miles. It says warm up the engine all the way, spray through a vacuum line connected to the manifold. Brake booster vacuum line is what I used, and you want to run it at 2,000 RPM. The non-professional just says you got to watch out with any sensors. So if you do spray into this area, which you would want to spray with all this connected if it did have a mass airflow sensor, but you do not want to spray into the mass airflow sensor because you might hurt it. So the biggest thing to watch out with this is I took this line here, that's the line to the booster, take it off with any kind of needle nose pliers. The engine will idle up a little bit from that vacuum leak, but ideally you do have a second person that keeps it at the 2,000 RPM, just because the lower the RPM are, the more of this stuff will puddle in the intake. These intakes are so long now because they have adjustable intake runners, and that changes your intake path. For low RPM, it gives you a long intake run. It goes all the way down there and comes back up. If you're at high RPM, it shortens that path. So the problem is, if you spray this is 11 ounces, so it's 300 milliliters or so of fluid, and it puddles in the bottom of that intake, and then you open up the throttle enough for all that fluid to get in the engine, you will bend the rod. So the biggest problem is you really want to rev this thing up. It tells you on the bottle to rev it up to 2 or 3 times, not exceeding 3,500, but it says do that at the end. Really, you're going to want to do this in between spraying, like say every 10 or so sprays, because you're going to spray it for a second. It's going to bog down the engine, and you're going to want to clear it out every so often, but definitely I would say at least 2 or 3 times before you use that bottle up, just because it will suck in some liquid, and it'll maybe even knock a little bit or ping a little bit, because there's just too much in that combustion chamber, and you definitely do not want to rev it too high. So if you're revving it to 2,000 while spraying, probably in between rev it 2,500, 3,000, but don't even rev it up very high before it's cleared out. So you got to be very careful when you introduce any kind of liquid, fluid, anything into that combustion chamber. This stuff comes out kind of like a foamy version of WD-40. It smells similar in strength. It does not smell as strong as the Wins or BG stuff that you see people in the shops use. It's really that stuff is really strong or nasty smelling, and I'm sure this is still not good for you, so I always wear gloves while spraying the product, just because, especially with this type of nozzle, it has the 2-mode nozzle. It will usually, you get a couple drops somewhere on your hands or whatever. So I'm going to start this thing up. I did let it soak now for an hour. So you put the product in, clear it out after you do that, idle it for a minute, and then you let it sit for an hour to heat soak it. So I'm only revving it up because it's already cleared out, because I did the whole process an hour ago. I tried to find something to push on the gas pedal, but it's really tricky to keep that RPM at 2,000 if you're doing it alone. So that's about it. I'm gonna drive it. It says drive it 10 minutes on the highway, and it says to drive it like probably 1,000 miles in the following week on the highway, just to get the optimal results, and hopefully that helps out the carbon problem without bending the rod. Thanks for watching.